While the world was still blinking in confusion, China moved faster than Trump could fire off a tweet. A 125% tariff and a ruthless rare earth squeeze, a masterstroke wrapped in a velvet glove. China's response to the aggressive American tariffs was nothing short of a diplomatic ballet. Rather than falling into a tit-for-tat screaming match, Beijing orchestrated its countermeasure with a level of poise that left Washington looking like an elephant trying to dance ballet. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce, in a statement shorter than a Trump tweet, declared a sweeping 125% tariff on all American imports. No fanfare, no theatrics. It was a single, devastating note played on a global economic piano. What made this even more impressive was the timing. In geopolitical chess, tempo is everything. China not only maintained tempo but seized initiative. While U.S. officials were still arranging press conferences to congratulate themselves on teaching China a lesson, Beijing had already signed, sealed, and delivered its own lesson with a subtle smile. The simplicity was almost insulting. No multi-page reports. No fiery rhetoric. Just a one-liner: you tax us. Fine. We tax you back. And by the way, we'll strangle your tech industry for dessert. China's announcement was not just a tariff adjustment, it was a statement of sovereignty, resilience, and quiet fury. This wasn't an emotional reaction, it was a chess move 8 turns ahead, executed with the nonchalance of a grandmaster sacrificing a pawn to trap a queen. Trump's administration, fresh from their America First pep rally, suddenly found the economic landscape altered. Businesses that had praised the tough stance now faced ballooning costs, shrinking margins, and a looming sense of dread. Farmers, manufacturers, tech companies, all began to realize they had been conscripted into a battle without weapons or armor. And Beijing? They simply smiled politely and continued business as usual. The elegance of China's counterstrike was in its strategic precision. They didn't carpet bomb the U.S. economy, they applied pressure exactly where it would hurt most, industries vital to Trump's voter base. Agriculture. Manufacturing. Technology. Each sector faced tailored pain, like an artist applying just the right brushstroke to a masterful, if merciless, painting. Historical parallels abound. In 1971, Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard in what was seen as a shock to global markets. China, however, learned from history, shock isn't always effective. Sometimes, slow strangulation is far more lethal. Rather than alienating allies with bombastic rhetoric, China courted them quietly, offering trade incentives to nations bruised by American tariffs. While Trump closed doors, Beijing opened windows, a classic flanking maneuver worthy of Sun Tzu himself. Critics might argue that China's actions were predictable. But predictability, when executed with surgical precision, becomes inevitability. Watching China's trade countermeasures unfold was like witnessing a glacier move, slow, unstoppable, and utterly indifferent to human noise. American media, ever hungry for sound bites, struggled to find an angle. How do you criticize a nation that doesn't gloat? How do you spin a narrative when the enemy simply acts with cool professionalism? In one swift motion, China achieved multiple objectives. Retaliate effectively without escalating into chaos. Strengthen domestic industries by redirecting supply chains. Position themselves as the reasonable adult on the global stage. Meanwhile, U.S. allies looked on with growing discomfort. Europe, facing its own trade tensions with Trump, quietly deepened ties with Beijing. Southeast Asian nations, wary of being caught in the crossfire, leaned towards China's orbit. Even traditional American allies like Australia and Canada began hedging their bets. Rare earth elements, the obscure periodic table entries most politicians couldn't spell, suddenly took center stage. These minerals are the unsung heroes powering smartphones, electric vehicles, advanced weaponry, and even wind turbines. Without them, America's dreams of tech supremacy would evaporate faster than a campaign promise after election night. China, controlling over 70% of the world's rare earth production, didn't need to shout. They simply hinted at export restrictions, and the global supply chains broke out in a cold sweat. No need for missiles when you control the very atoms that make modern civilization tick. It was a checkmate delivered with a whisper. Trump's administration, so obsessed with bringing China to its knees, apparently forgot to check if their own knees were tied to Chinese rare earth supplies. Spoiler, they were. While American policymakers grandstand, Beijing quietly built a monopoly over decades. They subsidized mining, controlled processing, developed expertise, and most crucially, never bragged about it. Like a chess grandmaster who keeps a queen hidden in plain sight. Trump's tariffs targeted Chinese goods, but China's rare earth dominance wasn't just another good, it was the backbone of critical industries. Defense contractors, tech companies, energy firms, all critically dependent on Chinese rare earth supplies. It was less a supply chain and more a supply noose. In response to American tariffs, China didn't need to shout. A single whisper from a Ministry of Commerce official, "We are considering export restrictions," sent shockwaves through global markets. Prices for neodymium, used in high-performance magnets, soared by 300% overnight. Production schedules for electric vehicles collapsed. U.S. military contractors found their supply lines strangled not by armies, but by a clever twist of trade policy. The genius of the rare earth strategy was its plausible deniability. China didn't outright ban exports. They introduced new environmental inspections, updated licensing procedures, and export quotas for sustainable growth. Every move coated with bureaucratic politeness, every restriction cloaked in the language of regulation and environmentalism. Meanwhile, American companies scrambled. Stockpiles vanished. Alternative suppliers, mainly in Australia and Myanmar, couldn't ramp up quickly enough. Investment rushed into rare earth independence projects, but mines take years to open, and processing facilities even longer. China had spent decades perfecting an industry others considered too dirty, too difficult, or too politically risky. Now they reaped the rewards, wielding rare earths like a scalpel against the jugular of American industry. Every tech CEO in Silicon Valley suddenly had to add "rare earth expert" to their resume. Congressional hearings were held. Consultants made fortunes telling government officials the obvious: "You're screwed." And still, Beijing remained calm. No loud proclamations. No chest thumping. Just a quiet tightening of the noose, one regulatory adjustment at a time. The media struggled to explain the situation to a confused public. Rare earths? Aren't those like gold? No, dear viewer. Rare earths are to technology what oxygen is to fire, invisible but essential. Try building the future without them. Spoiler alert, you can't. China understood this. Trump didn't. Worse, Trump's administration seemed genuinely blindsided. There were no contingency plans, no emergency supplies, no diplomatic leverage. America's high-tech empire, it turned out, was built on sand imported from a quarry in Inner Mongolia. In the art of negotiation, understanding your leverage is crucial. Trump, with the finesse of a bull in a china shop, decided to go big without checking if he was standing on solid ground. Tariffs were announced with bravado, but the basics were overlooked. America's tech industry is deeply dependent on Chinese minerals. With a flourish of his pen and a thumbs up to cameras, Trump signed tariffs into law, and effectively started a slow-motion tech apocalypse at home. Semiconductor manufacturers, EV makers, defense contractors, all suddenly found themselves staring at looming shortages and skyrocketing costs. Meanwhile, Trump's team tried to spin it as strategic pressure. The markets, however, called it what it was: self-sabotage. Stocks of tech giants plummeted faster than a politician's approval rating during a scandal. Trump, who prided himself on deal-making, had managed to lock himself in a room with no exits, and proudly declared it a victory. At first, Trump's bold maneuver seemed cinematic. Strong, decisive, made for headlines. Tariffs raining down like confetti at a victory parade. Yet, like a magician who forgot the end of his own trick, Trump had overlooked one tiny, inconvenient detail: America was not independent. It was entangled, economically, technologically, and politically, in ways his administration hadn't bothered to fully understand. You see, winning in business isn't just about swagger, it's about knowing where the raw materials come from, who refines them, and who holds the keys to production. The modern American economy, sleek on the outside, was underpinned by countless invisible threads tied firmly to Chinese supply chains. Trump didn't just press the wrong button, he mashed every wrong button on the panel. It was as if he declared war on oxygen and then acted surprised when everyone started gasping. The American tech industry, once the jewel of Silicon Valley, found itself flailing. Semiconductor production slowed. EV makers scrambled. Aerospace firms begged Washington for emergency waivers. The America First tariffs had become America Alone tariffs. Investors fled. CEOs panicked. White House aides tried, desperately, to retroactively spin a strategy where none existed. Meanwhile, Trump's tweets raged on, full of defiant bluster. We are stronger than ever. China needs us more than we need them. The irony, thick enough to slice with a knife, was that even MAGA hats imported from China were now more expensive. Global perception shifted. Allies who once politely applauded Trump's trade bravado now exchanged worried glances. Was there a plan? A roadmap? Any adult supervision? Foreign diplomats quietly mocked the administration's chaos. European newspapers printed cartoons of Trump riding a missile labeled tariffs straight into a wall. While Trump imagined himself a wartime general, in reality, he was a man standing knee-deep in a moat he had dug himself, heroically declaring that the water was part of the plan. Every attempt to negotiate from a position of strength was undercut by simple math. Need magnets for a missile guidance system? Sorry, you need Chinese neodymium. Planning a big 5G rollout? Hope you enjoy delays, because the hardware relies on rare earths. Even patriotic companies, eager to reshore production, discovered the painful truth: building factories is easy. Building a supply chain, that takes decades. And China? They merely watched, adjusted minor policies to deepen the squeeze, and continued smiling for the cameras. To outside observers, it was becoming embarrassingly clear: America had launched an economic blitzkrieg against the wrong enemy, in the wrong terrain, without logistics, without supply lines, and without a backup plan. And still, Trump bellowed about winning. It was the kind of winning that leaves you clutching participation trophies while your competitors collect the real prizes. By mid-2025, the cracks in the American economy were no longer theoretical. Consumer prices spiked. Manufacturing output slumped. Unemployment in key sectors crept upwards. Rural states, the heart of Trump's electoral base, felt the bite hardest. Angry farmers, saddled with unsold crops and skyrocketing equipment costs, flooded town halls demanding answers. Factory workers, promised a manufacturing renaissance, instead faced layoffs. It wasn't just bad optics. It was bad policy. It was bad leadership. It was a masterclass in how not to wage economic warfare. Wall Street, initially buoyed by patriotic bluster, soon sobered up. As rare earth prices surged, so did production costs across the tech, automotive, and energy sectors. Analysts who had once cheered America First suddenly began issuing dire warnings about supply chain collapse. The Dow Jones, after a brief rally, went into free fall. Nasdaq tech stocks, particularly those relying on high-tech components, bled value day after day. Boardrooms in Silicon Valley lit up with emergency meetings. Defense contractors whispered to the Pentagon, "We might have a little problem." What was supposed to be a triumphant economic siege turned into a humiliating retreat. America had shot itself in the foot, and was now trying to win a marathon. China, meanwhile, didn't gloat. They didn't have to. The scoreboard did it for them. Wall Street, once drunk on the sweet nectar of tax cuts and deregulation, suddenly found itself waking up with a brutal economic hangover. The first tremors were subtle. A slight dip in tech stocks. A whisper among bond traders. But by late April 2025, the full earthquake hit. And it hit hard. As China tightened its grip on rare earth supplies and global supply chains froze, companies faced soaring production costs. Semiconductor giants like Intel and Nvidia issued profit warnings. Tesla delayed new model launches. Boeing announced layoffs, citing critical material shortages. Investors panicked. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 2,000 points in a single day, a crash quickly dubbed Tariff Tuesday. Financial news anchors, who once gleefully parroted Trump's claims of winning the trade war, now stumbled through live broadcasts, desperately trying to explain why the so-called boom was evaporating before their eyes. Meanwhile, Trump tweeted furiously about fake news and strong fundamentals, even as corporate America burned. In geopolitics, hard power is obvious: armies, nukes, carriers. Soft power is often overlooked: ports, supply chains, critical minerals. China mastered both. By controlling rare earths, China didn't just leverage economic pain, they touched America's technological soul. No rare earths. No chips. No chips. No economy of the future. The elegance of China's move was in its restraint. They didn't ban anything outright. They simply restricted exports, created additional documentation requirements, and let market forces do the rest. International trade lawyers could argue semantics, factories couldn't argue empty supply rooms. In the game of grand strategy, China showed what real leverage looks like: silent, patient, and utterly devastating. True power doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from controlling the lifelines everyone else depends on. In the grand game of global power, rare earths were merely a pawn. The real genius of China's strategy was this: they didn't just control materials, they controlled the future. With each passing day, it became clearer that America wasn't fighting China, America was fighting gravity itself. The global economy had tilted, slowly but surely, toward Beijing. And Trump, in all his bluster, was like a man yelling at the tide to stop rising. China understood that power wasn't about tariffs or angry tweets. It was about quiet, patient, strategic dominance. By controlling critical supply chains, from minerals to manufacturing to logistics, Beijing held the world's economic pulse in its hand. This was not just a trade spat. This was a cold, calculated, strategic flex from a rising superpower. And it worked. As Trump scrambled for answers, analysts debated how much of America's innovation economy was, ironically, made in China. Meanwhile, Beijing tightened its grip with the effortless poise of a master pianist adjusting the tempo of an orchestra. The rare earth saga of April 29, 2025, will be remembered not just as a trade war moment, but as a defining pivot in global power dynamics. It was the day China showed it could win wars without firing a shot, and Trump showed that bluster without strategy is just noise. And so, the world watched. One nation shouted, rattled sabers, hurled tariffs like confetti at a crumbling parade. The other simply moved the levers of power quietly, patiently, and claimed the future without firing a shot. Rare earths were only the beginning. What China truly mastered was the art of inevitability. Because while noise wins headlines, it is structure that wins centuries. And in the long game of history, the scoreboard doesn't care who yelled the loudest. It only remembers who built the road. America didn't lose because it was weak. It lost because it was arrogant. It lost because it mistook bluster for leadership. And China,